happy Friday. We are filming live on location another episode of Mavens of Manufacturing. I'm used to saying good morning, but it's actually good afternoon where I'm at. I'm on the East Coast this time, and I'm super excited to have our guest today with us, Laura. Thank you, Laura, so much for joining us. And I like to start off each episode with you just introducing who you are and, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in the manufacturing sector, because it's a little bit different for everybody that I've talked to. And, some of us have fell into it by accident. I was not planning on ever being in this sector, and then I found tech writing, and now I write for industrial manufacturers as a tech writer. So what has your journey been like, and how has it led you to where you are today?
Well, hi, Meaghan. It's lovely to see you, and thank you very much for inviting me on. Who knew that when Jill introduced us a year ago, this is where it would lead to?
Yeah.
My name is Lara Ramdin. I am the Chief Innovation and Science Officer for Upcycled Foods, Inc., and I've been in this role 8 weeks now. And prior to that, I used to work for Dole Packaged Foods, and before that, Molson Coors and Estee Lauder and Unilever. So I've worked for a few different companies, always in R&D and innovation. And I guess my relationship with manufacturing is obviously anything that I develop or do R&D on isn't worth anything if it can't be manufactured, right? So you have to you have to have a very close working relationship with your operations and manufacturing teams. I did not plan to do this. I think when I was doing my degree, we were talking about your daughter and how she's sort of at the start of her journey and she's trying to figure out what it is that she wants to do. I think when I was doing my degree and my PhD, I didn't imagine that 20 something years later I would be working for a company that upcycles waste at the manufacturing level, waste and byproduct streams at the manufacturing level, to create food ingredients that then go back into the human food system. That's not what I did my degree and my PhD on. My PhD is on immunology. I was looking at how white blood cells are recruited from blood vessels and how they move across the blood vessel wall and then get to the lung in order to, and their role in cystic fibrosis. So you couldn't be more, I guess, it's sort of a 180 versus where I started, but it created, I've always, like your daughter, I think I've always been curious. I stayed curious, and I used the foundational knowledge that I had built through my degree and my PhD to do other things, actually. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, when I got my first job at Unilever, they hired me because I had done cell biology and I had done cell culture, and I'd done that in my PhD. So, and that's the sort of expertise base that I brought to the table, and so it went from there.
Were you always interested in science growing up then? Was that like one of your favorite things to learn about and just get into?
Yes. I mean, I was pretty obsessed with it, I would say. That's not to say I wasn't obsessed with other things, though. I mean, I love reading, and I love words, and I love literature, and I love theatre, and I'm like a Broadway junkie, and music, and a film junkie as well. So I have other interests out of science, but I suppose when I was at school, I didn't. Nowadays, I think if I had a different choice, I might have gone down the arts route, but at the time I obviously didn't know how to make a career out of that, and so I sort of really science became all consuming, I think, when I was younger.
I feel the same way. Like, I've always been a writer and I love writing, but I was in creative writing and poetry, and by the time I got to college and I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, you can't really make a ton of money if you're not like one of the best creative writers out there. And then I found out about technical writing, and that was more stable as a career option, and it just worked out. So, but I'm a Broadway junkie too. I'm obsessed with Hamilton right now. Like, I love Hamilton. It's so well done, and I wish I could have saw the initial cast in New York City when it came out.
I saw the original cast on Broadway, and what's really interesting is my friend and I had an opportunity to see it when it was at the Public, And I thought, oh my God, it's like a modernization of a tale about American history. Who wants to see that?
Yeah.
And then, of course, then it became like this overnight sensation, and it moved to Broadway. I literally at the time, because I was living and working in New York, I was seeing everything. I was seeing, maybe 2 or 3 shows a week. And then I said to my friend Alexa, "Is there anything that you want to see?" And she goes, "Well, we need to see Hamilton because everybody's talking about it." And I was like, "Really?" And then by that time, I went online, and obviously the tickets were very expensive then. So we sort of did a negotiation about the minimum that we would pay. Little did I know that obviously it completely blew me away, number one. But number two, that I would end up seeing the original cast. So Leslie Odom Jr., Lin-Manuel
Yeah.
Miranda, Jonathan Groff, Philippa Sue, all of them. And so now, of course, it's one of those core memories.
Yeah, I didn't think I was gonna like it as much as I did, but I just thought the style of the music and how they had a rap battle too in one of the scenes was really iconic. Like I just thought it was really cleverly done. So it's in one of my top five favorites for sure. But
I mean,
I
it's a masterclass in Broadway shows for sure. There's no doubt,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. But I do want to point out, so we have Hank who is on. He has his daughters watching who he calls the junior board of directors. So Hank, thank you for joining us today. And
I
anyone else who's joining, feel free to drop your questions or comments in the comment section. I'll try to pull you in during this conversation. Laura's filled with knowledge, and I'm really excited to talk about, what you're doing with food waste and sustainability. But before that, I want to take a deeper dive into your position because one of the issues that I'm trying to connect companies with when they're trying to promote some of the opportunities they have for career pathways with schools is, better educating the communities what those positions are and what they look like and some of the roles and responsibilities. Because when I was in high school, again, I didn't know what tech writing was. I had no idea it even existed. I learned about it when I transferred colleges after I got pregnant with my daughter. And I was still like, what is it? Like, I have no idea. So you're a chief innovation and science officer. So can you break that down for us and like kind of explain what your day-to-day routine looks like and some of the problems that you're helping solve, who you're working with, what your daily activities are, where you get to go, what events you get to participate in?
Okay, yes, sure. So I think I recently went to a middle school actually to talk about upcycled food, because
Okay.
I met their science teacher at a book club event, and we were talking about sustainability and upcycling food, and she said this is an area that's really fascinating. Can you come and talk to my kids? So I said sure, and they were is sixth grade around 11 or 12, is that right?
Sixth grade. Yep, that's 11 and
Yeah, so
12 for us.
there were a huge group of 11 and 12-year-olds. And after I'd spoken to them about upcycling, there were a couple of girls that came up and said, "How did you get your job?" Because it's your job sounds really cool and I think I want it. And I said, "Well, you know, I was explaining that there was, a number of years before I got to my job." And I said, my advice to her was the first thing you need to do is if you really want to work in R&D, innovation, science in a company, then you need to build a solid R&D foundation. So my degree is in applied biology, but it could be engineering, it could be biology, it could be biomedical sciences. You need some kind of sort of science anchor, at least,
Hmm.
because it teaches you, I think, critical thinking, and it teaches you how to plan an experiment, and it teaches you on some level you need that sort of basic understanding. Of course, if you're working in the food business, having a food science degree or having a nutritional degree is always is ideal, really. So that's the first thing. So I would say doing the degree and the PhD that I had gave me a real understanding of and especially since I moved to Unilever to be a cellular molecular biologist, of the different types of techniques that I needed to use in order to be able to do that role effectively. But more importantly, how to plan my own experiments, because at that,
Hmm.
that was what was required. By the time you get to here to this role, it becomes about being able to marry the science that you've learned and the science understanding with business goals, which is a very different skill altogether, right? And
Yeah.
that's not something that you wake up one day and you say, okay, I was a scientist yesterday, and tomorrow I'm going to be a scientist that can now work in a business. That doesn't work. You have to really, I think you have to work in a business. You have to have people that show you and guide you and mentor you on how to adapt that science in order to deliver to business goals, whether that be, meeting a certain number of consumers, or understanding consumer preference, understanding sensory biology, all of those things. All of those things are things that you learn when you're working for consumer, in my case, consumer facing businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my day it's frankly at this stage thinking thinking and strategizing and thinking about how to achieve the business goals as quickly as possible, number one. Number two, developing that framework, like what are the things, and at this level it becomes more and more important for all the people that you work with to determine the things that you will work on, but also the things that you won't work on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people in teams need direction and they need guidelines, and they need to be able to say, okay, I've got to do all the things in here, and I'm not going to do things outside here, because especially if there's not very many people in the company, it's very difficult, easy to get distracted, and when you've got finite amount of resources, you need to stay focused. It's also your job to figure out with other business leaders where you're going to make the biggest impact, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's more work to do to understand how science and R&D contributes to the P&L, financial understanding, right? So that's not something I could ever have anticipated, actually, but it becomes much, much more about how does it affect my cost of goods? How does it affect my operations? How does it affect, what's the margin? These are all things that I could not have anticipated when I was starting to do science when I was at college. So I'm talking specifically about doing R&D and innovation in a business. Of course, you can also follow an academic route, which means that then it becomes much more about owning your area of science and creating a depth of understanding in that area of interest.
Mm-hmm. So when you're trying to make that connection or transition, are there specific resources that help you, kind of step out of the scientist role and then more into the business role? Like where do you go to like keep your mind fresh and connected with the upcoming trends and all that stuff? Like where do you like watch presentations? Do you read certain books? Do you connect with certain mentors of yours? Like how do you keep growing and learning and adding to your continuous improvement?
I was always really interested in the business as it happens, and I didn't know that would be the case. But when I finished my PhD, I did a 1-year postdoc, and then I went to work for Unilever, and I guess that's where my curiosity was fired up, and that's when I was working in research. But then I met someone who worked in product development in skincare, and I was talking to him about the things that I had seen going on at shelf, because I was naturally interested, and he was like, you should come and work in product development. So in that case, it was a mentor, and he saw something in me, and he's still a mentor, by the way, all these years later. And then once I had been given sort of the freedom to think about all the different opportunities and possibilities, then I became more hungry for knowledge, and then became more of my own expert, because I was reading, for fun. I was reading back of packs and doing my own comparisons on the different claims that people were making in body care, and trying to think about the story that these body care products were telling to consumers and how we could differentiate. So that's how it started. And then honestly, I guess I read a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot, and I read a lot around my subject area as well. I mean, I'm obviously reading a lot about food waste right now, and I'm reading a lot about what's going on in policy, and I'm reading a lot about what's going on, because now I'm in this position. I want to be able to use this position to affect change. So how do I get involved in different conversations that can change the way policy governs what we do with food waste? But then I'm also looking at, if we're creating ingredients that then go back into the human food system, I'm looking at what's going on in different food categories. So I'm looking at what's going on in snacks and beverages and bread and cookies and all of these different things. So I'm never not reading and never not learning something.
So let's get into that with food waste and sustainability. What are some of the current stats that you can share with us on the food waste and loss, not just here in the United States, but around the world? Do you have specific stats for that?
So in the US, I do have the stats for the US. In the US, we waste 38% of the food that is, made, we waste 38%. That's an extraordinary amount of food.
Yeah.
Considering 10% of the US is hungry. If you equate that to number of meals, that's 149 billion meals worth of food that we waste as of last year. That's the updated stats for last year. We wasted 149 billion meals worth of food. So if you think about that for a second, even if you don't work in food waste, right, it doesn't matter what you do as a job. When you think about them, that I think is kind of soul destroying, isn't it? Nobody wants to waste that amount of food, right? No, I mean, everybody knows that there are hungry people.
Mm-hmm.
We want to do more with that. So, and that's why, and upcycling is one of the things that we can do in order to tackle that. I mean, as humans, we have to be better. We have to do better.
Right.
Because also that food that we waste goes to landfill. It does. And I don't know where people think their food goes. In fact, I don't think people think about that, by the way.
It's not like there's a fairy somewhere that's coming and waving their wand and making it magically disappear. So it's really interesting to hear that, and that's just the United States. That's
just the US. I mean,
whole world.
I would surmise that the figure is probably around the same ish around the world. I think that where I come from, the idea of having a composting bin, for example, has been in play for longer, right? So I always use this example, but my mum is 83, and where I grew up, which is just outside London, she has had 5 different bins for a long time, right? And she is more than capable of separating her rubbish into 5 different bins, one of which is a composting bin. So if my mum can do it in her late 70s, early 80s, then we can all do it. But composting is still a very new behavior for people, unless of course you're a sustainability sort of junkie in that way. I went for dinner last night with a friend, and she told me that she has been composting herself for a long time, and she actually has a machine outside in the back garden that she composts. I mean, that's unusual, more than the norm here in the US. But I think in other countries in the world there's infrastructure that's been in place for longer in order to deal with food waste. Yeah. And whilst the amount might be the same, the route of where the fate of that food waste is different.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming more of like an awareness to issue here in the United States, because I just visited a school where they're actually talking about how to do composting and how to create sustainable gardens, and growing your own food, and where you can grow it, not just like outside but inside your house. So I feel like we are slowly turning a leaf, but I don't know the stats enough about it. So I do want to learn more about upcycled food. So can you provide a definition of what upcycled actually means, and then get into why the nonprofit organization, because it is a nonprofit, correct?
Well, there's 2 things. Refed is a not-for-profit organization, which essentially is the organization that deals with collecting, managing policy and doing all the
Gotcha.
insights. And it also has a grant for certain organizations in the food waste space. We are
Oh,
we are our profit, but we
okay.
but yeah, and of they're in the Upcycle Food Association, which is our certification body, if you like, our membership association. There are 263 members, so that means there are 263 companies that are working in the upcycled food space and developing ingredients and or products that
Okay.
are made from materials that would otherwise go to landfill. The official definition of upcycle foods is diverting food from landfill and elevating that food to its highest and best use.
Okay.
Because there is food that's wasted that goes to animal feed, for example, which is
Mhm.
totally okay. But actually, what we're interested in is putting it back into the human food system. And that's what we mean about its highest and best use.
Okay. So what are the biggest hurdles to make upcycled foods available to everyone?
Yeah, I would say the biggest hurdle. I mean, when you have any kind of waste, other than the food that gets donated, by the way, because the donation, the food donation bill has just passed, so now we should see more people being able to access food at the end of a day or near its shelf life that can then go and be donated. But if you're working in the upcycle food space, I guess the biggest challenge is to take that food and convert it into something else. You need some
Mhm.
kind of manufacturing process, and in order to be able to do that effectively, at scale, that's where we need to be able to do it at scale commercially in order for it to be accessible for everybody. Because I think it will have to become part of all future food systems. My wish is that whenever anybody is designing a new food product, there's a mandate to include a certain amount of upcycled ingredients for both for
Mhm.
food waste, reduction of greenhouse gases issues, but also because I think it's a way to manage supply chains more effectively in the future.
So are there things that you're doing now to kind of help overcome these hurdles, or are there things that you need help with from like any of our audience members to make the hurdles less? Like,
I think that whenever we find, so our company is focused on being the partner of choice for food manufacturers who don't know what to do with their waste or byproduct streams, but know that there's nutrition in that waste or byproduct stream, but don't know what to do with it. And so our plan obviously is to take those things and find the right process, create a nutritious ingredient, but then continue to expand and do that at scale, because the bigger that you do that, the more volumes you can do, the cheaper it will be, and make that an accessible price point. And that's always in our runway. So finding the most cost efficient method of creating that value from food waste is of the utmost importance to us. Yes. So anybody who's working in manufacturing and is work and has novel methods to work with us to take waste and create something of value from that, we'll be interested in, of course.
okay. And then earlier you mentioned Reset as the nonprofit organization, because I
Yeah.
mixed up the two and I apologize for that. So can you give us more detail on why that organization was created and how long it's been around and what are some of its like mission statements that it's doing?
I mean, it was created because there were a group of people who were very passionate about doing something about food waste and decided to come together to create a fund, essentially. um, and it has several different people contributing to the fund, philanthropists and so on, who provide money in order for these guys to do the work on understanding the data behind food waste, that can inform public policy. So that data is what goes to, they work with the Harvard food policy law group, and that goes
Okay.
to the government, because and it's used to inform things like the Farm Bill, or it's used to, all that data is used when they go to talk to Biden about his his hunger and nutrition bill. And so it was put together to essentially to basically create awareness, number one, and number two, to generate the insights in order to inform both government policy and businesses, so that they have the data to be able to tackle this issue properly. Otherwise it becomes very nebulous, because people know that food waste is a problem, but they don't know. And also, in a way, ReFed does the research to understand what consumers are thinking, and because actually it's, although emotionally people understand that food waste is an issue, like I said, they don't, once it goes in the bin, they're sort of not emotionally thinking about it anymore, right? It goes in
That's
the
true.
it goes in the
Yeah,
bin, I've forgotten about it, right? So they're not thinking about that,
that's
um
true.
unless you live in New York, I think. And then there's a reminder on the streets on a regular basis, probably, but most people just put stuff in the bin and then don't think about it anymore. So part of their role is actually to spend money on doing the research, generating the insights to create awareness, also to build a community of people who are working at various different stages in the food waste cycle, right? So the people that are, that are working. I was at a ReFed conference in May, and there were like 750 people working in food waste, but in all different aspects of it, right? So there's a big group of us who are working in upcycling, of course, but then there's people who are doing different kinds of food waste, people who are working in donation, all sorts of people.
So,
And sorry, carry on.
no, go ahead. Finish
No,
your
no,
statement.
it's all right. I had finished.
One of the things that we talked about prior to this conversation too was the labeling that is on packages, and I wanted to get into that a little bit. And we do have a couple other people that chimed in here. We have Robert, who said 138B, a staggering and sad figure, and then we have Philippe from France tuning in. Thank you for Philippe. I need to learn French for you, because you talk in French on my podcast sometimes. And then we have Zane, who got here a little bit late, but he's assuming something here. There's a huge problem with the rigid dogma that expiration dates on food has, and the regulations with it all. FMCG manufacturing has so many waste points down the chain. It's almost a direct opposite of most metal manufacturing applications. Having been in a few food manufacturing plants, the efficiency in plant is amazing. The inefficient transport, stocking, and selling of those products is the insane part. That's an interesting comment, but I want to get into how we're labeling things, because there's a couple that I've noticed. One is Best Buy, and then they have the date, or they have the expiration date, and I never knew what the difference was. I always like, when there's a date on something, if it hits that date, I'll open up the container, I'll smell it, sometimes I'll taste it, sometimes it's not a great result when I taste it. But what is the actual difference between these labels, and how are they determined, and what does it all mean? Because as a consumer, I have no idea.
You're
I'm not.
confused.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm really confused.
And one of the things that you're asking what ReFed does, I mean, obviously, one of the things that ReFed does is that they are a group of experts who come together to form, experts' opinions and advise people. And ReFed have been very vocal about this. Did you know, and I did not know this, by the way, until I came to work here in food and beverage, expiration dates are not federally mandated. So that means
No,
that which you would imagine, you would sort of think that I mean, perhaps this is naive of me because I'm not from the US originally, But you'd have thought that that would be something that would be federally mandated, but it's not. So actually what you have in the US is this sort of patchwork of dating depend across different states, actually.
See, I assumed that it was all federal. So
No, I
this,
also assumed it was federal, but it's not. So that's the first thing. And so then, of course, then it's managed at state level. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is we're not using consistent language, right? So you yourself did your own research. So there's best before, eat by. I mean, we could probably go on the different words that are used, right? And Refed has said this, many times, and I think that this is a mantra that we need to use, and it's certainly definitely a movement that's also going on in the UK, because I don't know whether you know this, but in the UK that retailers are the ones that have moved first, and retailers are actually removing their expiry or best before dates or expiration dates from hundreds of foodstuffs that don't need it, like fresh
like
fruit
there's
and
just a minute.
vegetables. You can tell when a piece of fruit or a vegetable is not ready, cannot be consumed
Yeah,
anymore, right?
because yeah.
Because you can look at it.
And if it smells a certain way, you
Yes,
probably
yes,
don't want
yes.
to eat
And
it.
if you can't look at it, then you touch it, and if you can't, or you smell it. You use your senses, whichever senses are available to you. You use those senses to determine whether or not fresh fruit and vegetable can be consumed. And we have become very reliant on, as consumers, as to what the pack tells you, but actually often that date on the pack isn't necessarily when it's not safe to consume anymore. It's often when a manufacturer decides that it doesn't taste the same way as we want you to experience it. So I would say at the
Well,
very top level, from a regulation point of view, as a food manufacturer, it's not always easy to operate because the framework is different depending on where you are, because it's not one framework for everybody. Number one, it's also not, and it also is not necessary. I mean, for example, canned food doesn't really need an expiration date, but it has one.
really.
Yeah, I mean,
See, that's something
canning,
I've always
but
questioned too, because it's
if you
like,
go onto the Refed website, if you Google expiration dates, you will see that Dana Gunders, who leads Refed, she has talked about this quite publicly, that canned food especially doesn't necessarily need an expiration date. The problem is, of course, if you've got a canned food in your larder or in your pantry, over time the texture, the quality and the taste of the product will change, and that's really what that date is for, to advise you to eat
mhm.
it before it makes that change. But safety wise, canned food doesn't really require expiration dates. So one of the things that obviously Dana says is that if we were to standardize that, it would have a huge impact on the reduction of food waste. Just that alone would.
I'll have to get her information and link to her, because I'm definitely interested in learning more about that. Because, it's interesting too, based off of what generation you're talking to as well. They have different opinions of when food is expired or when canned foods taste good or not. Like my parents, they're in their late 70s, and back in the day, I mean, they didn't have any of the expiration dates or best by dates. They didn't really have packaged food either. Microwaves came around when, I remember when we got our first microwave, and it was like a big deal to my parents. And I'm not that old, so it's like, and then TV dinners came out and everything like that. So yeah, it's interesting how they're defining that. And the frustrating part too, I don't know if you've ever bought like a packaged thing of fruit, but my mom gets strawberries all the time, and it has a date on it. And the thing that's frustrating is some of the berries sometimes are molded and fuzzy and all this stuff, but the date on there is like still good. And we're just like, what's going on with this? Like, clearly there was a miscommunication or something about the good of the strawberries. So, Yeah, so
I actually posted in the chat for you. I can put it in the comments as well. There's a refed sort of dates labeling standardization thing as well, the document, if you want to read more about it. I think what we as a community of people who are trying to significantly reduce food waste, what we say is that you need to get back to your senses, and you need to use those senses to determine whether or not, I mean, if you've got a piece of meat or a piece of fish that isn't good, then you know, right? I mean,
yeah,
you just know. You don't need the expiration date to tell you that, right? So
yeah,
it's vegetable. So I mean, and I'm positively encouraged by the fact that retailers in the UK are see that and see that are leading the charge. It shouldn't have to be to the retailers to lead the charge, by the way, but I'm glad that they are, because they recognise that the retailers are also making the choice, by the way, to remove plastic wrappers from fresh fruit and vegetables. Like, there's no need to put cucumbers in a plastic bag or peppers in a plastic bag or things like
yeah.
that. So, I think that there are positive changes, but and there's plenty of evidence. I mean, that's what ReFed does. That's their bread and butter. It does the research, it pulls all the evidence together, and it provides it to people who can make those changes. So
Hmm.
one would hope to see more changes coming in the future.
Are there any like partnerships that you're creating, not just with like the food manufacturers and the vendors, but like grocery stores? Is there any work that you're doing with how they're getting rid of food? Because, I hear the store, I don't know if you have any of these situations in the UK, but here in the United States, there are people that will wait by the dumpsters behind grocery stores because they will throw away all of these foods, and people who are like hungry will wait by the dumpsters and actually pull that packaged food out of the dumpsters and bring that home because they're not well off, or they you come from a certain income situation, so they're basically dumpster diving for all of these foods that are getting thrown away because of the expiration dates. Are there like anything that you're doing with grocery stores to like figure out how to handle that food waste?
So our focus is really at the manufacturing end, right?
Okay,
So to work with the people who are making the food and to say,
gotcha.
okay, in your manufacturing, are there any waste streams or byproducts that are of value that we can then process to put back into the food system? So, for example, we have launched with Kroger two breads under the Simple Truth brand using our upcycled flour, for example. So Kroger has a zero hunger, zero waste agenda. So this fits very well within their strategy. So those breads were launched a couple of months ago, and I'm hoping that we will do more, because, I mean, for me, bread is a low hanging fruit, right? Why wouldn't you, wherever possible, in all bread kind of products, use flour that has been made from
Hmm.
upcycled ingredients as opposed to virgin, quote unquote, flour, both for carbon emissions, nutrition, and also the impact on the virgin source. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you make that just part of your future food, your future
Yeah.
breaded products design anyway? Because it's only has positives. So we've just launched that with Kroger, so I hope we do more. I think that in the UK we have a lot of people who, I mean, as retailers do away with more and more best before dates, you will probably see a shift. But actually, but they used to have a yellow sticker, which meant,
Okay.
according to according to that particular date on that pack, it meant that it was within a day of its shelf life. I use the shelf life in inverted commas, given the conversation that we had previously.
Yeah,
um,
because it's
and so
different for everyone.
swayed to people who just go shopping for things that are with a yellow label, basically, and
Okay.
they're 30% cheaper. And
Okay.
and then obviously, when people, and I know people who only shop for yellow label things because they are of the mindset that when they were growing up, they just tested everything using their eyes. They looked at it taste, looked at it, smelt it, taste it, and if it was good, then they used
Yeah.
it. So it does depend on your generation, right? Because if your
Yeah.
parents were just after the war, then of course there was a lot of scarcity, so they didn't have the luxury of being able to throw things out that they thought may or may not be not good anymore, right? They used everything.
Yeah. My dad is like the perfect example of that because he will ignore the dates and he's just like, no, if it smells good, it's so good. If it tastes good, it's so good. So he's like the
Well, I mean, if
perfect
you
example.
type in date labeling to Google, the first article that comes up is "Busting the Myths of Date Labeling." So your
I
grand
have
your
to.
father is your father is kind of right. That's not to say that I now want people to just randomly eat things and make themselves ill,
Right.
right? Just to be really clear, I want to put this disclaimer that we don't want people to be ill, but we
Yeah.
want people to check, obviously. But
Yeah. Absolutely. There is a food delivery service here in the United States, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's just, I was just kind of laughing at it a little bit because it just seemed common sense where what it basically does is takes the disformed fruits and vegetables, so a carrot that's not, perfectly straight or a pepper that's not perfectly looks like a pepper, and they put all of this fruit and vegetable together and that's the box they send to people
yes,
so that
it
they
was.
have the fruits and
They
vegetables.
were they were a member of the. It's called Imperfect Foods, and
Yeah.
they were a member of the they were a member of the Upcycled Food Association. They've
Yeah.
now merged with Misfits Market. It's called. So if
Oh,
you ever
cool.
want to buy fruit and vegetables or upcycled food, so food that's been made using upcycled ingredients, you can go to misfitsmarket.com and buy things there.
But I just thought it was kind of funny how people wouldn't buy something because it looked a certain shape or something. Like if it wasn't a perfectly straight carrot,
But
people would just,
that's more common than you think, though, Megan. Right? It doesn't bother you, but it bothers a lot of
no,
people.
yeah, which I didn't know was a thing. So I just kind of chuckled at it. But I thought it was a great idea because, like, how else to, like, kind of preserve food in a different way for people that it doesn't matter. So, yeah,
Well,
I'm glad that they,
Imperfect Foods and Misfits Markets. Now, what they try to do is they try to educate people to say, look, this is a perfectly good carrot. It looks odd, but it's not straight, but it's a perfectly good carrot, and you should
it's
buy it
totally,
because it's full of nutrition. So it's almost it's a little bit whack that we have to educate people.
yeah, it,
Unfortunately, for those of us who have seeing available, for many of us who have seeing available to us, we taste with our eyes, right? So then
yeah,
we've already decided in our brain, and we need to rewire our brains, by the way, in our brains, because over time people have been given this perfect food that's perfectly shaped and a perfect length and a perfect width. We assume that's good to eat, and then our brains looks at something that doesn't look perfect and says, no, that's not good to eat. And that's
yeah,
modernization, unfortunately, because your mum and your dad and my mum and your dad, my mum and my dad wouldn't have cared, but that's just something that we have to change now, because actually your children, your little boys, and also your daughter, they're the ones that are asking questions and saying, but I don't think it needs to be that way. And
yeah.
so I think it's our duty now to be able to say no, to listen to them and go, no, you're right, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my kids, my two boys, to eat broccoli because they don't like it. So
It
they,
is. I think it's a little bitter, actually, broccoli for a child's palate. I think that's the problem. I mean, you either like it or you don't, right?
yeah,
I know plenty
they're
of
they're very, they don't even like mashed potatoes, which is very surprising to me because I
that's
thought that was like,
that's a texture thing. I think that's a texture thing. Don't you?
yeah, I think so too. But I just thought it was surprising because a lot of kids that I do know like that, but they for some reason are like, nope, we want it in French fry form, and that's it. So we adapt. But Laura, this has been really interesting, and I appreciate you coming on. And is there any other closing thoughts that you have before I ask you my final questions? Like, is there any closing thoughts that you have for our audience today?
So I would say that if people are interested in their own way in contributing to reducing food waste, number one, we all should be meal planning so that we don't contribute to food waste. So 37% of the 38% that gets wasted in total, a third of that comes from us at home. Around a third, about 37%. So that means
Wow.
you and me and Zach and Robert and people on the call, we're all contributing to a significant
Yeah.
amount to that food waste that goes to landfill. So in our control is not overbuying. Number one, not overbuying. Number two, using our senses to determine whether or not something is really bad or not throwing things away blindly based on the date that happens to be on the pack. And then number three, the other thing is I would be looking for food in the supermarket that actually uses upcycled ingredients, but more than that, actually has an upcycled certified logo on the pack, because that means that if an ingredient and or product has been certified, it's been audited by an independent third party, but it also ensures the transparency of the supply chain. Since we are a manufacturing podcast here, I think that that's important, because someone has gone to the trouble of having someone come in and audit and actually prove to them that the materials used to make that product would otherwise have gone to waste. So
I
there are
didn't even know there was such a logo on the packages. Are there specific brands?
I'm going to send you now. This is the so upcycled certified products predicted to prevent millions of pounds. There's an article on Refed, but there's also the Upcycled Food Association, and on there you can find a list of the products that you can buy. So obviously I mentioned Kroger Simple True Bread. That's where we are. We are also Stone and Skillet Muffins. If you like English muffins, that's made using our upcycled Super Grain Plus flour. But in the association, there are people who are making beverages out of upcycled whey, making chips. Pulp Pantry is a chips brand that uses upcycled vegetables from juice presseries. So you'd be amazed at the things that get wasted when you think about nutrition and you think about good food. But all of these people are creating value from all these things that get wasted. And it has a logo on it. So look for the Upcycled Certified logo.
I'm gonna look for that now when I go grocery shopping, but I did drop those links into the comment section. So if you guys don't see those, just let me know and I can redrop them after we get off this recording. But Laura, is there anything else that you would like? So if you had like one big ask for our audience, what would that be? I know that you mentioned the three things, but is there a bigger ask that you would like to ask our audience?
I guess there is. The bigger ask is that if there's anybody on the call who works in food product design and food manufacturing, I think the future of food has to include upcycled ingredients in the food system design. So I think that, and I think that requires collaboration. And so I would ask anybody in the network, and also anybody listening to this or anybody listening to this post, this LinkedIn Live, to let's work together to make sure that we're future proofing our food systems together by always considering upcycled ingredients in food system design as a natural go-to.
Absolutely. Well, Laura, how can people get in touch with you if they have any more questions, or where's the easiest place to find upcycled foods?
So I will send you. So for sure, find Upcycle Foods Inc. on LinkedIn and follow our page, because we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking more about the things that we're doing moving forward. We're writing. It's Upcycle Foods Inc. Upcyclefoods.com, not to be confused with the association. So I'm going to send the link to you now. So follow our page, and then please follow me and connect with me. And I'm happy to. That's our website there, Meaghan. I'm happy to connect with all and any, and I'm always posting about various different things to do with food and food waste and female leadership in food and things like that. So yeah.
Do you have any upcoming events that you'll be attending or speaking at that people can?
The next event will be the Institute of Food Technologists in Chicago. So I will be there. I will be on a panel on the Wednesday. So if anybody wants to come and say hi, please do. And yeah, I look forward to meeting new people.
That's in my backyard, so I'll probably have to try to make that if my calendar is open, because Chicago's only a drive away from me.
Oh, yes.
But Laura, I will definitely try to make that. I got to check my calendar and see if it's available. But Laura, I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak with me here on Mavens of Manufacturing. This is really educational for me, and it's going to make me more aware as a consumer now of what I'm buying and purchasing in terms of food, and how not to waste food. I really try not to do that, because I know that it's a big issue. So thank you for educating me and providing us tips for that as well. To all of you listening in, be sure to connect with Laura on LinkedIn, and we have another great episode planned for next week, so be sure to tune in on Mavens of Manufacturing next week. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
This episode of Mavens of Manufacturing has been sponsored by Z Ink Solutions. Z Ink Solutions. This isn't your grandmother's copywriting service. We provide copywriting and copy editing services that provide impactful text and memorable storytelling for a variety of brands and industries. Contact us today at zinkSolutions.com. That's z-inksolutions.com.